The prince who masters the art of conversation wields a weapon more powerful than any sword. In the grand theater of human discourse, where reputations rise and fall with each exchange of words, the ability to deliver a sharp, decisive comeback can mean the difference between commanding respect and suffering humiliation. This treatise explores the sophisticated art of conversational warfare, drawing upon the timeless wisdom of political strategy to arm the reader with verbal weapons that can silence opponents, redirect discussions, and establish unassailable dominance in any social or professional arena. Consider the scene: a boardroom where ambitious executives circle like wolves, each seeking to demonstrate their superiority through clever barbs and intellectual posturing. The air thick with tension, careers hanging in the balance with each carefully calculated word. It is here, in these moments of high-stakes verbal combat, that the principles of strategic communication reveal their true power. The executive who can deliver the perfect comeback, sharp enough to wound, clever enough to impress, and final enough to end the discussion, emerges victorious, while others are left scrambling to recover their dignity. The foundation of this art lies not in crude insults or petty retorts, but in the sophisticated understanding of human psychology and the mechanics of social dynamics. When someone challenges your position in a meeting, attacks your credibility at a dinner party, or attempts to embarrass you in front of peers, the natural instinct is to become defensive, to explain, to justify. This instinct, however natural, is often the path to defeat. The master of conversational warfare understands that explanation is weakness, that justification is submission, and that the person who speaks last often speaks best. The truly devastating comeback operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it appears to address the immediate challenge or insult. Beneath this surface layer, however, it accomplishes something far more significant: it reframes the entire dynamic of the conversation, establishing the speaker as the dominant force while simultaneously diminishing the challenger. The most effective comebacks don't merely deflect attacks, they transform the attacker into the attacked, often so smoothly that observers barely notice the shift has occurred. In the world of high-stakes communication, timing becomes everything. The perfectly crafted response delivered too late loses its power, while even a mediocre comeback delivered at the precise moment can devastate an opponent. This requires not only quick wit but also the ability to read the room, to understand the audience, and to gauge the exact moment when silence has lingered long enough to create tension but not so long as to suggest defeat. The master practitioner develops an almost supernatural sense for these moments, like a predator sensing weakness in its prey. The psychological foundation of effective comebacks rests upon understanding what truly motivates human behavior in social situations. People engage in verbal sparring not merely to exchange information or even to win arguments, but to establish and maintain their position in the social hierarchy. Every challenge is ultimately about status, every insult an attempt to elevate oneself by diminishing another. The person who recognizes this deeper game can play it far more effectively than those who remain focused on the surface-level content of the conversation. Consider the power of the redirect, perhaps the most elegant weapon in the verbal arsenal. When someone attempts to embarrass you by pointing out a mistake or failure, the amateur's instinct is to deny, excuse, or minimize. The master, however, acknowledges the point while simultaneously using it as a launching pad for an even more devastating attack on the challenger. "You're absolutely right about that failure," comes the response, "which is why I'm surprised someone with your track record would bring it up." The original attack is not only neutralized but transformed into ammunition for a counterattack that strikes at the heart of the challenger's credibility. The art of the preemptive strike represents another crucial element in conversational warfare. Rather than waiting to be attacked, the skilled practitioner learns to identify potential challenges before they arise and address them in ways that make the attack impossible or foolish to pursue. When entering a situation where criticism is likely, the master might begin by saying, "I know some of you are thinking about the Johnson project, and you're right to question those decisions. It taught me exactly why the approach we're discussing today will succeed where others have failed." This technique transforms potential ammunition for opponents into evidence of wisdom and growth. The power of selective response cannot be overstated in these exchanges. Not every challenge deserves a response, and the ability to distinguish between attacks that require immediate action and those that are better left to die in silence represents a crucial skill. Some insults are so poorly crafted or obviously desperate that responding to them only dignifies them beyond their worth. The true master knows when to strike with devastating force and when to let an opponent's words hang in the air, their weakness evident to all observers. Emotional intelligence plays a vital role in crafting effective comebacks. The response that devastates one person might bounce harmlessly off another, depending on their psychological makeup, insecurities, and motivations. The skilled practitioner learns to read people quickly and accurately, identifying the precise vulnerabilities that will make their words most effective. This is not cruelty for its own sake but strategic necessity. In the arena of high-stakes communication, half measures often lead to complete defeat. The technique of escalation management allows the expert to control not just the content of the conversation but its intensity and direction. When faced with an aggressive challenge, the amateur often matches that aggression, leading to an escalating conflict that may spiral beyond anyone's control. The master, however, can either de-escalate with a response that diffuses tension while maintaining dominance, or escalate strategically in a way that puts the challenger in an impossible position. The choice depends entirely on what serves the strategic objective best. Understanding audience dynamics becomes crucial when crafting comebacks in group settings. The response that impresses colleagues in a business meeting might fall flat at a social gathering, while the wit that earns laughter at a dinner party could seem unprofessional in a boardroom. The expert learns to calibrate their responses not just to their opponent but to the observers, recognizing that in most situations, winning over the audience matters more than defeating the challenger directly. The use of intellectual jiu-jitsu, turning an opponent's strength into weakness, represents one of the most sophisticated techniques in verbal warfare. When someone attacks you with their expertise, the master finds ways to make that very expertise seem narrow, pedantic, or out of touch with reality. That's exactly the kind of theoretical thinking that sounds impressive in academic circles but falls apart when you have to produce real results, transforms apparent weakness into strength while making the opponent's credentials seem like liabilities. Preparation plays a far larger role in successful comebacks than most people realize. The wittiest response appears spontaneous to observers, but often builds upon hours of mental rehearsal and scenario planning. The master practitioner develops a repertoire of adaptable responses, like a jazz musician who can improvise brilliantly because they have thoroughly mastered the fundamental structures of music. When the moment arrives, what appears as brilliant spontaneity is actually the execution of carefully honed technique. The art of the callback, referencing earlier statements or actions to create devastating comparisons, provides another powerful weapon. When someone criticizes your judgment, the prepared response might reference their own past mistakes, coming from someone who confidently predicted that the Henderson merger would be completed by last Christmas. I'll take that criticism as a positive sign. This technique not only deflects the immediate attack but creates a broader narrative about the challenger's credibility that can influence future interactions. Body language and vocal delivery often matter more than the actual words chosen. The most cleverly crafted comeback can fall flat if delivered with nervous energy or defensive posture, while even a simple response can devastate when delivered with the right combination of confidence and dismissiveness. The master understands that communication is not just about words but about the complete package of verbal and nonverbal signals that combine to create an impression of strength or weakness. The strategic use of silence creates space for devastating effect. Many amateurs rush to fill every pause in conversation, fearing that silence suggests they have nothing to say. The expert, however, understands that well-timed silence can be more powerful than words. A slight pause before delivering a comeback allows tension to build, making the eventual response more impactful. Similarly, allowing silence to follow a particularly devastating response lets the weight of the words settle fully before the conversation moves forward. Cultural and contextual awareness becomes essential when operating in diverse environments. The comeback that works perfectly in one cultural context might cause serious offense in another, while responses that seem mild in casual settings might appear inappropriately aggressive in formal situations. The skilled practitioner develops sensitivity to these nuances, adapting their approach to maximize effectiveness while minimizing unintended consequences. The principle of proportional response guides the expert in matching the level of their comeback to the severity of the challenge. Responding to mild criticism with devastating personal attacks can make the responder appear unstable or cruel, while failing to respond adequately to serious challenges can project weakness. The master learns to calibrate their responses precisely, delivering exactly the level of force necessary to achieve their objectives without appearing excessive or insufficient. Understanding the difference between winning the battle and winning the war becomes crucial in ongoing relationships. Sometimes the most strategically sound choice is to allow an opponent a small victory in the moment while positioning yourself for a much larger success later. The person who destroys every challenger immediately may win individual encounters but lose the broader game of relationship management and reputation building that determines long-term success. The technique of strategic vulnerability can be surprisingly effective when used correctly. Appearing to concede a minor point or acknowledge a small weakness can lower an opponent's guard while setting up a much more significant counterattack. You caught me there. I clearly haven't kept up with the latest changes in that area as well as someone in your position would, followed immediately by which is why I focus my energy on the strategic decisions that actually determine whether we succeed or fail. This approach turns apparent weakness into evidence of superior priorities and judgment. Advanced practitioners learn to plant conversational landmines, responses that seem innocuous in the moment but create problems for challengers later in the conversation. A casual comment about someone's track record or decision-making process can be referenced later to devastating effect if they make subsequent statements that contradict or undermine their earlier position. This requires thinking several moves ahead, like a chess master who sees combinations that won't become apparent for many turns. The power of the implied insult often exceeds that of direct attacks. Rather than calling someone incompetent directly, the expert might say, "I'm sure you did your best with the resources and experience you had available." This approach delivers the same message while making it difficult for the target to respond without appearing overly defensive or paranoid. The insult exists in the subtext, obvious to everyone but deniable if challenged. Mastering the art of the non-response response allows the expert to avoid being drawn into unwinnable arguments while maintaining dominance. When someone makes a statement designed to provoke a defensive reaction, the skilled responder might say, "I'll let that comment stand on its own merits," or "I think everyone here can evaluate that statement for themselves." These responses avoid engagement while implying that the original statement was so obviously flawed or inappropriate that it requires no refutation. The use of reframing transforms the terms of engagement to favor the skilled practitioner. When someone attacks your methods, the expert response might focus on results. When they attack your results, shift to methods or intentions. When they attack your intentions, focus on outcomes. This constant shifting keeps opponents off balance while ensuring that the conversation always moves toward ground where you maintain advantage. Understanding power dynamics within specific environments allows the expert to leverage existing hierarchies and relationships. The comeback that would be inappropriate between peers might be perfectly acceptable when delivered by a superior to a subordinate, while responses that work between equals could backfire when directed upward in a hierarchy. The master learns to read these dynamics accurately and adjust their approach accordingly. The technique of the delayed fuse involves planting ideas or making statements that don't have their full impact until later in the conversation or even in subsequent interactions. A casual comment about someone's tendency to change positions when it becomes convenient can be referenced weeks later when they do exactly that, creating a powerful demonstration of predictive insight that enhances credibility while undermining theirs. Advanced practitioners develop the ability to maintain multiple conversational tracks simultaneously, engaging with the surface topic while building deeper narratives about credibility, competence, and character that influence how everything else is perceived. This requires significant mental agility but allows for far more sophisticated and effective communication strategies than simple reactive responses. The art of the gracious devastation allows the expert to deliver crushing responses while maintaining the appearance of civility and reasonableness. I appreciate your perspective, and I'm sure it reflects your experience level, or that's certainly one way to look at it, though I suspect most people in our position would see it differently. These responses demolish opponents while making it difficult for them to claim they were treated unfairly or inappropriately. Physical presence and spatial dynamics contribute significantly to the effectiveness of verbal responses. The expert learns to use positioning, eye contact, and body language to reinforce their words and create additional psychological pressure on opponents. A response delivered while standing when others are seated, or while making direct eye contact when others look away, carries additional weight beyond the words themselves. The principle of conversational momentum teaches that the person who controls the pace and direction of dialogue maintains significant advantage. By speeding up when opponents need time to think, slowing down when they're eager to respond, or changing topics when they're gaining ground, the expert maintains control over the flow of interaction in ways that compound the effectiveness of their verbal techniques. Understanding the psychology of face-saving allows the master to craft responses that achieve strategic objectives while giving opponents ways to retreat with minimal humiliation. This approach prevents the desperate counterattacks that can occur when someone feels they have nothing left to lose, while maintaining the possibility of future productive relationships when that serves strategic purposes. The use of historical or literary references can add weight and sophistication to comebacks while simultaneously demonstrating intellectual superiority. As Churchill once observed about a similar situation. Or, this reminds me of the conversation between. These approaches work particularly well with educated audiences who appreciate the additional layers of meaning they provide. Developing signature techniques and response patterns that become associated with your communication style creates anticipation and psychological pressure that works in your favor even before specific comebacks are delivered. When people know you're capable of devastating responses, they often self-censor or avoid challenging you directly, achieving your objectives without requiring actual confrontation. The expert learns to distinguish between opponents who can be neutralized with humor and those who require more direct approaches. Some challenges can be diffused with wit that makes the challenger look foolish while entertaining the audience, while others demand serious responses that establish clear dominance without room for interpretation. Reading these situations correctly prevents the mistake of appearing frivolous when gravity is required, or overly serious when lightness would be more effective. Master practitioners develop the ability to turn group dynamics to their advantage, using the presence of multiple people to amplify the effect of their responses. A comeback that might seem harsh in a private conversation can appear clever and appropriate when delivered to an audience that appreciates wit and decisiveness. Conversely, responses that work well in private might seem inappropriate or showing off when delivered publicly. The strategic use of personal information, either revealed directly or gathered through observation, allows for highly targeted responses that hit opponents where they're most vulnerable. This requires careful judgment about what information is appropriate to use and how to use it effectively without appearing to violate privacy or social norms. The goal is maximum impact with minimum risk of backlash. Understanding the long-term consequences of conversational choices guides the expert in deciding when to deliver devastating comebacks and when to choose alternative approaches. Some victories in verbal warfare come at the cost of relationships, opportunities, or reputation that may be worth more than the immediate satisfaction of defeating a challenger. The wise practitioner weighs these factors carefully before choosing their response strategy. The technique of progressive pressure involves starting with mild responses and gradually increasing intensity until the desired result is achieved. This approach allows for calibration based on the opponent's reactions while providing multiple opportunities for them to retreat before more devastating responses become necessary. It also creates the appearance of reasonable escalation rather than immediate aggression. Advanced practitioners learn to use silence and space strategically, not just in timing their responses but in creating environments where their words carry maximum weight. The comeback delivered in a crowded, noisy setting may be lost, while the same words spoken in intimate quiet can have tremendous impact. Understanding and controlling these environmental factors adds another dimension to effective communication. The art of the preemptive concession allows the expert to acknowledge minor weaknesses or mistakes before opponents can raise them, transforming potential ammunition into evidence of honesty and self-awareness. I know I haven't always made the right call on personnel decisions, delivered before someone else can make that point, neutralizes the attack while positioning the speaker as someone with enough confidence and wisdom to acknowledge their own limitations. The principle of conversational Aikido teaches the expert to redirect opponents' energy rather than meeting it head-on. When someone attacks with anger, respond with calm analysis. When they attack with logic, respond with emotion. When they attack with personal criticism, respond with professional observations. This approach keeps opponents off balance while positioning you as the more sophisticated and controlled participant in the exchange. Understanding the difference between public and private personas allows the master to craft responses that work with how people present themselves while subtly undermining the foundations of that presentation. Someone who presents as highly ethical can be challenged on practical results, while someone who emphasizes their pragmatism can be questioned about their principles. This approach creates cognitive dissonance that can be highly effective. The use of hypothetical scenarios allows the expert to make points about opponents' judgment or character without making direct accusations. What would you say about a manager who consistently blamed market conditions for missing targets while their competitors exceeded theirs? This technique delivers the criticism while maintaining plausible deniability and forcing the target to either accept the characterization or explicitly deny that it applies to them. Master practitioners develop the ability to embed multiple layers of meaning in their responses, communicating different messages to different audiences simultaneously. The surface meaning might be appropriate for general consumption, while subtler layers convey more specific or pointed messages to those with the knowledge to understand them. This sophistication allows for precise communication that achieves multiple objectives at once. The strategic use of questions as responses can be more devastating than direct statements, forcing opponents to defend positions they may not have fully considered or to admit ignorance about important details. What specific evidence do you have for that assertion, or how exactly would you propose to handle the complications that approach would create? These responses shift the burden of proof while highlighting potential weaknesses in the challenger's position. Understanding cultural codes and unspoken rules within specific professional or social environments allows the expert to craft responses that carry additional weight with insider audiences. A response that references shared experiences, common knowledge, or established precedents within a particular community can be far more effective than generic comebacks that anyone might use. The technique of controlled escalation allows the master to gradually increase the intensity of their responses while maintaining the appearance of being forced into stronger positions by their opponent's continued aggression. This approach creates the impression that you would prefer to keep things civil but are prepared to meet whatever level of intensity the situation requires. Advanced practitioners learn to use timing not just within individual conversations but across multiple interactions over time. A comeback that references something said weeks or months earlier can demonstrate both excellent memory and the fact that you take the person seriously enough to remember their words. This creates a sense of ongoing accountability that can influence future behavior. The power of the elegant insult lies in its precision and sophistication rather than its cruelty. The response that cuts deeply while demonstrating wit, intelligence, and perfect timing earns respect even from its target, while crude attacks often diminish the attacker more than their intended victim. The goal is surgical precision rather than brutal force. Understanding the economics of attention in group settings allows the expert to craft responses that capture and hold audience focus while making opponents compete for the same resource from a disadvantaged position. The person who can command attention naturally has significant advantage in verbal exchanges, as others must work harder to be heard and remembered. The strategic use of compliments can be as devastating as direct attacks when used correctly. I admire your consistency, you've never let changing facts alter your opinions, or your confidence is remarkable, especially given your track record. These responses deliver criticism while maintaining the surface appearance of praise, making effective counterattack difficult. Master practitioners develop signature techniques for different types of challenges and challengers. The response to intellectual snobbery differs from the response to personal attacks, while the approach to dealing with obvious incompetence requires different tactics than handling legitimate but inconvenient criticism. Building this repertoire allows for more effective and appropriate responses across a wide range of situations. The principle of strategic restraint teaches that sometimes the most powerful response is a measured one that could have been much more devastating. When people know you're capable of truly crushing responses but choose to deliver something more moderate, that restraint often carries more weight than the alternative would have. It suggests confidence, control, and perhaps even mercy that can be more psychologically impactful than raw aggression. Understanding the difference between wit and cruelty allows the expert to craft responses that achieve their objectives without crossing lines that could damage relationships or reputation. The goal is effectiveness, not sadism, and the best practitioners learn to deliver necessary messages with precision rather than excessive force. This restraint often makes their responses more rather than less effective. The technique of parallel construction allows the expert to make implicit comparisons that highlight opponents' weaknesses without making direct accusations. Successful people in our industry tend to focus on measurable results rather than elaborate explanations for why their strategies haven't worked yet. This approach delivers the criticism while maintaining plausible deniability and forcing targets to either accept the characterization or explicitly argue against it. Advanced practitioners learn to manage their own emotional state during verbal exchanges, maintaining the clarity of thought necessary for effective response while projecting the confidence and control that makes those responses more impactful. This emotional regulation becomes particularly important when facing personal attacks or high-stakes situations where mistakes could be costly. The strategic use of technical language or professional jargon can either establish credibility and exclude opponents from the conversation, or be used against those who employ it inappropriately. Could you explain what you mean by that in terms that everyone here can understand? Turns someone's attempt to appear sophisticated into evidence of their inability to communicate clearly with their audience? Understanding the psychology of saving face in different cultures and contexts allows the master to craft responses that achieve their objectives while providing opponents with paths to retreat gracefully when that serves strategic purposes. Sometimes complete victory in the moment is less valuable than maintaining relationships that will be important in future interactions. The use of statistical or factual information as weapons requires careful preparation but can be devastatingly effective against opponents who rely on emotion or opinion rather than data. The numbers tell a different story, followed by specific, accurate information, can undermine entire arguments while establishing the speaker as someone who deals in facts rather than speculation. Master practitioners develop the ability to read micro-expressions and subtle vocal changes that indicate when opponents are becoming uncertain or uncomfortable, allowing them to press advantages when they're most likely to be effective or pull back when continued pressure might backfire by generating sympathy for their target. The principle of conversational chess teaches the expert to think several moves ahead, considering not just how their immediate response will be received but how it positions them for subsequent exchanges. The comeback that wins the current skirmish but leaves you vulnerable to devastating counterattack may be less valuable than a more moderate response that maintains strategic advantage. Understanding group psychology allows the master to craft responses that work with natural human tendencies towards social proof and authority. When responses are delivered in ways that encourage audience agreement or laughter, they become more than individual exchanges, they become social events that establish hierarchies and influence future interactions within the group. The technique of constructive destruction involves delivering criticism that is devastating but also potentially helpful, making it difficult for targets to respond with pure anger or dismiss the feedback entirely. Your presentation skills would be much more effective if you focused on what your audience needs to know rather than demonstrating everything you know about the subject. This approach delivers hard truths while maintaining the appearance of trying to help. The expert learns to distinguish between situations where complete verbal victory serves strategic purposes and those where more subtle dominance is appropriate. Sometimes establishing clear superiority is necessary for future relationships and interactions, while other situations call for more nuanced displays of competence that achieve objectives without creating unnecessary enemies. The strategic use of personal anecdotes and experiences can establish credibility while implicitly criticizing opponents who lack similar backgrounds. In my experience leading teams through similar challenges, or when I was dealing with comparable situations these approaches establish authority while making it clear that you're speaking from practical knowledge rather than theoretical understanding. Advanced practitioners develop sensitivity to the broader political and social dynamics that influence how their responses will be interpreted and remembered. The comeback that seems perfect in the moment might have negative consequences for reputation, relationships, or future opportunities if it violates unspoken norms or expectations within the relevant community. The use of conditional statements allows for devastating criticism while maintaining plausible deniability and forcing opponents to either accept unflattering characterizations or argue against implications they may prefer not to address directly. If someone were consistently making decisions that led to these kinds of results, we might want to question their judgment. This technique delivers the message while providing escape routes if the situation requires them. Understanding the difference between public victories and private influence guides the master in choosing when to demonstrate superiority openly and when to work more subtly toward strategic objectives. Sometimes the most effective approach is to let opponents save face publicly while ensuring that key decision-makers understand the real dynamics at work. The principle of strategic honesty allows the expert to use truth as a weapon when it serves their purposes while avoiding unnecessary revelations when discretion is more valuable. The well-timed honest observation about someone's patterns, motivations, or track record can be more devastating than elaborate attacks because it's difficult to argue against factual accuracy. Master practitioners learn to use the physical environment to their advantage, positioning themselves for maximum impact while potentially putting opponents at psychological disadvantage through spatial dynamics. The response delivered while standing over someone who is seated, or from a position that commands the room, carries additional authority beyond the words themselves. The technique of progressive revelation involves sharing information or making points in carefully sequenced stages that build toward a devastating conclusion while preventing opponents from preparing effective defenses. This approach creates mounting pressure that can be more effective than delivering all available ammunition at once. The expert develops the ability to maintain multiple conversational objectives simultaneously, perhaps seeking to establish dominance over one challenger while building alliance with a potential ally, all while managing the impressions formed by neutral observers. This sophistication requires significant social intelligence but allows for much more effective navigation of complex group dynamics. Understanding the role of reputation and past interactions in shaping how current responses will be received allows the master to craft comebacks that build upon established narratives while potentially creating or reinforcing new ones. The person known for devastating wit can often achieve results with relatively mild responses, while someone without that reputation might need more dramatic approaches to achieve the same impact. The strategic use of silence and pauses within responses creates opportunities for emphasis, builds tension that amplifies impact, and provides time for careful consideration of the most effective next words. The expert learns to be comfortable with these pauses while recognizing when they enhance effectiveness and when they might suggest uncertainty or weakness. Advanced practitioners develop the ability to adapt their communication style to match or contrast with their opponents in ways that serve strategic purposes. Sometimes mirroring someone's energy and approach can make your response more relatable to observers, while other situations call for deliberate contrast that highlights the superiority of your approach. The principle of measured escalation teaches the expert to match the intensity of their response to the severity of the challenge while maintaining room for further escalation if necessary. This approach prevents the mistake of delivering maximum force responses to minor provocations while ensuring that serious challenges receive appropriately strong replies. Understanding the difference between temporary tactical victories and long-term strategic advantage guides the master in choosing when to press for complete dominance and when to accept partial success that serves larger objectives. Sometimes allowing opponents small wins in minor areas can position you for much larger victories in more important domains. The technique of implicit comparison allows for devastating criticism without making direct accusations, forcing opponents to either accept unflattering parallels or explicitly deny associations they may prefer not to address. This situation reminds me of the Enron leadership team's confidence right up until the end, delivers a serious message while maintaining enough ambiguity to avoid direct confrontation if that's preferable. The expert learns to manage the energy and attention of audiences during verbal exchanges, understanding when to build excitement and engagement and when to create thoughtful reflection that works in their favor. The response that energizes supporters while making opponents uncomfortable can achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. The strategic use of questions as implied challenges allows the master to force opponents into difficult positions while maintaining the appearance of simply seeking information. What specific qualifications do you have for making that judgment, or how exactly does your experience prepare you to evaluate this situation? These questions shift the burden of proof while highlighting potential vulnerabilities. Understanding the psychology of group consensus allows the expert to craft responses that encourage audience agreement while making it socially difficult for opponents to maintain their positions. When responses are designed to align with group values, shared experiences, or common sense observations, they become more than individual opinions, they become expressions of community standards that carry additional weight. The principle of controlled vulnerability teaches that strategic admission of minor weaknesses or limitations can actually strengthen your position by demonstrating confidence and self-awareness while making your credibility on more important matters seem more trustworthy. "I'm certainly not an expert in that technical area," followed by devastating criticism of someone's strategic judgment, can be more effective than claiming universal competence. Advanced practitioners develop the ability to embed teaching moments within their comebacks, delivering responses that not only address immediate challenges but also provide broader lessons about effective thinking, communication, or decision-making that influence future interactions and establish their authority as sources of wisdom rather than just clever responses. The technique of conversational jiu-jitsu involves using opponents' momentum and energy against them rather than meeting force with force. When someone attacks with emotional intensity, respond with analytical calm. When they attack with cold logic, respond with human warmth. This approach often leaves challengers feeling off balance and unsure how to continue effectively. The expert learns to distinguish between situations where humor is an effective weapon and those where it might diminish the seriousness of important issues or make the responder appear insensitive to legitimate concerns. The well-timed joke can deflate tension and establish superiority, while inappropriate humor can backfire severely. Understanding the role of nonverbal communication in amplifying or undermining verbal responses guides the master in ensuring that their body language, facial expressions, and vocal tone support rather than contradict their intended message. The devastating comeback delivered with nervous energy or defensive posture loses much of its potential impact. The strategic use of inclusive language can make responses more effective by encouraging audience identification with your position while isolating opponents as outside the consensus of reasonable people. Most of us recognize that. Or anyone with experience in this area knows. These approaches build coalition while making opposition seem unreasonable or uninformed. The principle of proportional response guides the expert in matching the level of their comeback to the severity and nature of the challenge while maintaining appropriateness for the specific context and audience. The response that would be perfect in a casual social setting might be completely inappropriate in a professional environment, and vice versa. Master practitioners develop signature approaches that become associated with their communication style while remaining flexible enough to adapt to different situations and opponents. This consistency creates anticipation and psychological pressure that works in their favor even before specific exchanges begin, as people know they're engaging with someone capable of sophisticated and effective responses. The technique of strategic empathy allows the expert to acknowledge opponents' perspectives or feelings while simultaneously undermining their positions or credibility. "I understand why someone in your position would feel that way," followed by explanation of why that feeling is misguided or irrelevant, can be more devastating than direct dismissal because it appears reasonable and considerate while delivering the same ultimate message. Understanding temporal dynamics in conversation allows the master to use timing not just for individual responses but for entire strategic campaigns that unfold over weeks, months, or even years. The expert who can plant ideas, establish patterns, and build narratives over time often achieves results that would be impossible through individual brilliant comebacks alone. The expert develops the ability to simultaneously engage with multiple levels of meaning in conversations, addressing surface content while building deeper narratives about competence, character, and credibility that influence how everything else is interpreted. This sophistication allows for far more effective communication than simple reactive responses to immediate challenges. The strategic use of specificity versus generality allows the master to choose whether to engage with precise details that demonstrate superior knowledge or to elevate discussions to broader principles that establish philosophical or strategic advantage. The choice depends on where your strengths lie relative to your opponents and what will be most impressive to the relevant audience. Advanced practitioners learn to recognize and exploit the psychological patterns that govern how people respond to different types of challenges and criticism. Some individuals crumble under questioning of their competence, while others become more defensive when their motives are questioned. Understanding these patterns allows for much more targeted and effective responses. The principle of elegant efficiency teaches that the most devastating comebacks often achieve maximum impact with minimum words, demonstrating such perfect understanding of the situation and opponent that elaborate responses become unnecessary. The expert who can deliver crushing responses with just a few carefully chosen words demonstrates mastery that goes beyond mere cleverness. Understanding the economics of attention and energy in group settings allows the master to craft responses that capture focus while forcing opponents to work harder for the same level of audience engagement. The person who can command attention naturally maintains significant advantage in verbal exchanges, as others must compete from a disadvantaged position. The technique of constructive destruction involves delivering criticism that is devastating but also potentially helpful, making it difficult for targets to respond with pure anger or dismiss the feedback entirely while still achieving the objective of establishing dominance or correcting behavior that serves strategic purposes. This comprehensive understanding of conversational warfare, from the psychological foundations that drive human behavior in social situations to the sophisticated techniques that allow for precise control over group dynamics, provides the serious student with tools that extend far beyond mere wit or cleverness. The master of these arts wields influence that shapes relationships, determines outcomes, and establishes lasting advantage in every arena of human interaction where words matter and reputations are made or destroyed through the quality of one's responses to challenge and provocation. The path to mastery requires not just understanding these principles but developing the judgment to apply them appropriately, the emotional intelligence to read situations accurately, and the discipline to choose strategic objectives over immediate gratification. In the grand game of human interaction, the person who masters these skills gains access to power that extends far beyond any single conversation or confrontation. They acquire the ability to shape the very terms on which they engage with the world.